Tabrizi is a Middle East analyst and is with me now. Good to have you here. So just hearing these details of reasonably empty villages that they're meeting as they make their way towards Mosul, hearing from the Pentagon that they're ahead of schedule, they're pausing things today. It does feel like, though, that we're bracing, the Iraqi forces are bracing themselves for something quite monumental once they hit Mosul. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think we are talking about very speedy success at the moment. But as Ahmad said, and as we are hearing from people on the ground, we are talking about the Peshmerga and the Iraqi forces mainly liberating villages and staying roughly around 30 miles still from Mosul. I think the big fight is going to take place once they actually get into Mosul.
Do we know how well equipped the Islamic State fighters are inside Mosul?
We don't. We know that there are roughly between 3.5 to 5,000 fighters in Mosul. So the numbers are quite high, and we know that in previous instances with much smaller numbers, they actually managed to resist the fight with the Iraqi forces quite a lot for a couple of months. So we are talking about a long fight, which is not going to be finishing in the next couple of weeks, but it's going to probably take weeks, if not months.
And what state will Mosul be left in at the end of it all, do you think?
That's very difficult to say. I think for now, what we can say is that the government is trying to make sure that its strategy takes place, and the strategy is basically trying to make sure that the Iraqi army, the Iraqi forces will come into the city first without any involvement from the Peshmerga or the Shia militias, to avoid any kind of sectarian infight coming into place after the take of the city. So that we have to see if will succeed, because we know that the forces have different stakes, and also we have to see what will happen with the 1.5 million civilians that are actually...
So we know they're planning to try and stop any kind of sectarian tension, but have they put some concrete plans in place to care for the civilians inside Mosul?
So we know about this fight since at least May. The government was talking about it since months, and we know there have been contingency plans prepared by UN agency and aid agencies in general, but the numbers that we are talking about are much larger than the capacity of this aid agency to actually provide shelter and food for the civilians. So we know that, for instance, the numbers we are talking about are 1.5 million, whereas the aid agency are talking about the capacity for 200,000. So this makes it very difficult and very hard challenge to deal with this issue, especially because also the camps that will need to host these people are going to be likely posted next to Mosul, likely to be subject also to target and airstrikes as well. So it's going to be a very delicate process, and that's, I think, why it's going to take a while.
Dr. Tabrizi, before we let you go, can I get your thoughts on one other sort of strand of what is happening there that's emerged today from here in Europe? And that is some concern from European officials that there's going to be a backlash, that we're going to see some of these jihadi fighters making their way to Europe.
Yeah. I think it's a legitimate concern. We know that already in the past few months, while the territory of ISIS was decreasing, de facto, the terrorist threat in Europe was increasing. So there was an inverse relationship between the two things. And we know also that in the past, ISIS fighters have been successful in flying back or returning to Europe through the refugees flows. So we know that this is a very likely possibility, and I think it's going to be one of the main challenges that Europe will need to face.
Yeah, another challenge for Europe at the moment. Dr. Tabrizi, thank you very much for joining us with those thoughts. More throughout the programme here on GMT about the battle for Mosul, and lots more coming up, including the business too. See you again soon.